So I think the last lesson was kind of a hard one. It was certainly a lot to learn. Um, our our endpoint certainly did a lot. Hopefully, this lesson will be a lot easier. We're going to just, now that we were able to add a message, now we're going to write our endpoints to retrieve our messages and to delete a message. We'll skip the updating of a message. We know how to do that. I think you all get the idea. Maybe that'll be a good homework assignment if you want to take that extra work on. But so without any further ado, let's write our function to find our messages. Right now we have a find and a find by ID, but those really are find lessons and find lessons by ID. So let's tag along a new find messages by lesson ID. Or let me say I'm trying to find lesson messages. How about that? Find lesson messages. So what this is going to do is we're going to enter a lesson ID on the URL on the rec.params, and then it's going to retrieve all of the messages that are attached to that lesson. And there's a super easy way to do it, and then there's a way that's probably a little bit more useful. And so I'll explain what I'm talking about. So the super easy way, let's write our function. Darn it, I already forgot what I named it. Here, let me copy it. There we go. We're going to pass in a lesson ID. The super easy way to do this would really be to return db messages dot where, not capital, lesson ID equals a lesson ID. And that would certainly work. What it's going to return is it's going to return all the fields that are in the message. So it's going to return a message ID, a message sender, and a message text, and then the timestamps. But what if your job requirement was that I want you to find me all the lesson messages, and for each message I want in the output, I want to know what the lesson ID was, also what the message ID was. So if you recall, each of these tables has their own ID field. Like this is the ID field for the lessons, and this is the ID field right here for the messages. And right now, the way we have it written, it's just going to return to us ID for the messages, the sender, and the text. But what if your boss or the requirements for this endpoint were to, I want to know what the lesson name, the lesson ID was, the lesson name, and then the message ID, and then the sender. And so what if it wanted some of the information out of this table and some of the information out of this table in the output? And that would require for us to do a join. And so we're going to do that. I'm going to show you how to do a join. You can go to the connects documentation and learn how to do joins. If you just do a find of join in connects, it'll show you how to do join several different ways. But I'm just going to show you how to do it right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to join the two tables together. And to do that, I usually was trained that you usually join your parent table first, although it doesn't really matter with the output. But I usually join the parent table. See, there's a parent table and then there's a child table. And the parent table has, for every one, you could have many over here. So there's a one-to-many relationship between a parent and a child. and I like to put the 1 first and then join the mini table to it. I know that's a lot of words. Let me show you in code. So return db lessons dot join. And join is in connects. It's in the documentation. This is how you join. And what are you going to join? You're going to join to what table? The messages table. And you also have to tell it what fields you're going to join on. So if you remember, we have this field syncs up with this field. So we have to tell it those two fields. And so join, and we have to specify it right within here. So I'm going to put the lessons.id field, because that's what the lessons primary key or the ID field is called. And then we put another comma and we say what field we're going to join it to in the messages table here. And that is messages dot, and what's the name of the field that it's joining to in the messages table? Lesson ID. Matter of fact, I'll just copy that right there. We're going to join it to that right there. So this says, join these two tables together. Start with the parent table, join to it the child table, and what fields are you going to use that is going to link these up? And you say where the lessons ID joins to the child primary key, joins to foreign key, right there. And so now that we've joined the tables together, we can sort of plumb pick the fields that we want out of either table in our output. And this is how we do that. We chain another select, and we start listing the fields we want. They wanted the lessons ID, so we got to refer to it by this name here, lessons. So lessons dot ID. Matter of fact, so we have to surround these with quotes. Lessons dot ID, and we can give them friendlier names for the output. So we can say lessons dot ID as lesson ID. And then we put a comma, we list another field, and lessons dot name as lesson name. Matter of fact, this is called giving an alias. We can actually give an alias to our tables. So we have to type less. For instance, lessons as L and messages as M. And then we can say on L.id joins to M. And then we can refer to this as L.id and L.name. You see what I mean? We've given the table an alias of the name of L, and everywhere else we can refer to it now by that new alias, this new value. And we also gave the messages table an alias of M. That just helps your code so you're not having to type as much. So so we got a lesson ID in there and a lesson name. Now let's get the message ID. So let's say m.id as message ID and m.sender as, no, sender's good. Sender, that'll just come across as sender. That's already a good name. And m.text. And finally, how do we get those records? We gotta finally now give us ourselves a where statement. Where lesson ID equals the lesson ID. The lesson ID that you're passing in on the command line on the rec.params is going to be the ID, let me see, of the message. So the message is going to be the ID of the lesson. You're going to pass in the lesson's ID and from it join to this table and get all the messages. So what we're passing in to here is the lesson ID. And so now we're saying join to this table, join these two tables together, get these, pick these different fields off of both tables where the lesson ID in the messages table is equal to the lesson ID we've passed in. And that should be good. That'll return all of them. So let's save that. And now let's go write our endpoint for that. And for that, we got to go over here to, and we'll stick it right underneath. And it's a get, right? Server.get. And it's /API/ lessons / we got to put the ID of the lesson from the rec.params, and then messages. It's the same endpoint as we had up here. Here we were posting to this endpoint. Now we're saying, give me everything from this endpoint. We could add our homies, rec res. And now let's deconstruct our ID field right here. Deconstructed that off right into here, so now we can use it as the ID. And now, let me see, let's do, I think it's pretty simple now. It's lessons dot, and what do we call our, we called it this, I'll just highlight it. Lessons dot this dot that. We're passing in the ID right here. We're passing in the ID that comes right off of here, which represents the lesson ID. And then we're saying dot then lessons. We're going to hopefully get back an object of at least one or more lessons. And res.status of 200 .json of the lessons, and that should be good. And if it doesn't work for some reason, we're going to have a catch, error, and res.status of 500 with the message of error retrieving messages, something like that. Let's save that. All right, let's go to Insomnia. That's what I like to use, or you can use Postman. Let's do a get messages by lesson ID and see what we got in there. And there we go. Get lessons by message ID. Let me do this. Actually, let me delete this because I had already done that ahead of time, and I had already done this ahead of time. So let me delete that. Let's go. Let's post just another message. Let me see. Post add message here. Let's add another message. Just add one more to make sure that we know. And we'll add it to lesson number 1, and we'll just say named Ashley. I like CSS. All right, we're going to add this message to lesson 1, and we're going to send that. Boom. All right, so we got a new message. We got 3 messages in there. So now let's write our, let's do our get. Let's new request, call it get messages by lesson ID, just so it'll, and this is a get. Let's just copy this get message by lesson ID and paste that right in there. And we're looking for lesson ID of 1. And then we have to put messages on the end because our endpoint has messages on the end. That's the endpoint that's going to give us all this information. All right, let's test this out and see what we get. All right, there we go, and there's the one we just added. So our getting all the messages, and you notice that the fields that we got are some of the fields from the lessons table and some of the fields from the messages table. So we were able to create sort of a unique object with information that was combined from both tables. And that is super, super common. That is one of the strengths of relational databases, is you join tables together in unique ways to retrieve information and to frame it and to mold it so the user can use it in a particular way. And so, all right, now let's go and do a delete. See if we can delete one of them. So for that, we have to go to our helpers. And what should we call this? We should call this just probably remove message. There we go. Go down and add it on the end. Function remove message. We're going to pass in the ID. Now, this time, we're not passing in the ID of the lesson. We're passing in the ID of the message because we want to delete just a particular message, and that message has its own, if you recall, its own ID. A message also has its own ID on top of the ID that links it to the lessons table. So we're going to pass in this thing, this ID field, that allows it to go look up and find the record so it can delete it. So, and we basically return, if you recall, a delete returns a count of the number of records that was deleted. So it's going to return db from what table? Messages table. And then we're going to say dot where the ID field equals the ID field. Since we've named them the same, we can do that. Or once again, we can do this where the ID field in the table matches the ID field that we passed in right here. But since the values are spelled exactly the same, we can use this shorthand for those of you that have just joined us. I know I say that every time I do it. And then the thing that actually, so this goes in this table, finds the record, and now this is what deletes it. Then boom, it deletes it. And it's going to return a count of how many records has this ID, which should be 1. So let's save this. And now let's go write our endpoint. Put it right down here. We called it server dot, it's a delete, and API slash. This time it's different. We don't need to pass it the lessons, because actually deleting a message has nothing to do with a lesson itself. It's sort of its own thing, right? So let's just create the endpoint messages ID. You can really make these endpoints anything you want. Whatever you make, that's what the user has to go to in the URL in order to make these things happen. So we're going to pass that. We got to do our homies, rec, res. Let's deconstruct, once again, the ID off of the URL equals rec.params. let's give ourselves a little bit of room here. Let's see. Then we get lessons dot. We called it remove message. Oh, and our linter highlighted it for us. Remove message, and we're passing in that ID. We're saying dot then, and if you call it, returns a count of how many rows. So I'm going to say then the count, and we're going to say if count is greater than 0, then success. res.status 200 dot JSON with a message of let's give it kind of a let's use the backticks and use some string interpolation and say message with ID. Whoops, not those, these. ID successfully deleted. That way we can pass a message letting them know that the record with this ID was successfully deleted. And then else res.status of 404, because obviously if it couldn't delete it, if the count was 0 or less, then it couldn't find that ID. JSON. Unable to locate message, or there is no message with that ID. No message with that ID. And then let's have a catch in case for some reason this fails even to run to begin with. Res.status of 500 dot JSON with a message of error deleting message. Just giving me an error. Let me say, oh, catch. I did something wrong. Let me see. Let me just do this catch again. Catch. Dot catch error. Res.status of 500. You know, it's like your fingers have better memory than your brain sometimes, and you just need to wipe it out and just let your hands just do what they need to do. JSON message unable to delete message, or error deleting message, or something like that. Let's hit save. And now let's go try to delete a message. Let's go to Insomnia. Let me see. Let's try to delete the one that I did. Message with message ID of 1. So it should leave these 2. So let's add a remove. New request. Remove message. And it is a delete. We add this and we copy the endpoint. Well, from here back. Control C, message, paste that in, and we said API slash. What was our endpoint? API messages ID. There we go. API messages slash, and the ID we wanted to delete was ID number 1. And let's see what kind of message we get back. Message with ID 1 successfully deleted. Beautiful. Now let's go prove it. Well, let's get all those messages again. If I hit send, this one should go away. And it does. It leaves us with message number 2 and 3. So there is a delete. The only one we haven't done is update. I think you get the drill by now. If you want me for sure to do an update, send me send something in YouTube, and I'll circle back and make sure I do an update. But um, I think you got the idea with these. Wanted to make this a short and quick lesson after the. Here, let me get back to the code in case you need to look at it. There you go. After the last video, which was kind of long, I wanted to make this one nice and short. And in the next video, we're going to be discussing routing. So we have all these endpoints, and this file is getting so long, and there's just a better way of being able to organize it. And we're going to work into that where we start to organize and architect our code base better. And so I look forward to showing you that in the next video. Thank you.